following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And it is Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. So do you want to get to lower the risk in your investment portfolio? You get paid to do that? You know, there's a paper out from Northern Trust. We're going to be talking about that extensively. Do you want to be paid to lower the risk in your portfolio? That's what they're talking about, but maybe it doesn't quite work that way. We're going to talk about that later in the program. And we've seen some huge and long-lasting protests, and we've seen police brutality. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and we saw continuing protests and police brutality that time, too. I think there's some similarities between then and now, and we're going to be talking about that later in the program. But first, I want to start with this. Albert Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world. He elaborated, saying, "He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it." Einstein was referring to compounding interest. A little bit makes a big difference. You know, you wouldn't think that the difference between 5% and 10% over 25 years would make that much of a difference. If you invested $100,000 at 5%, after 25 years, you'd have $338,635. Sounds like a pretty good sum, huh? It more than tripled. But what would it be if it grew at 10% over those 25 years? What would it be at 10% over 25 years? But before I give you the answer, I want you to think about it for a moment and guess what you think it would be. 10% over 25 years. I'm giving you just a little bit of time to think about it. Think about what your answer is. Got it? Okay. But before I give you the answer, let me ask another question. I started my career at a national brokerage house, and I spent the first 18 years of my financial services time working for those big brokerage houses. And they used to tell us, sell the relationship, not the performance. I shared this with you before. So what did they mean? So Josh Brown, you've probably seen him on CNBC. He's written a book called Backstage Wall Street. And this is a quote from that book. Most of the brokers, and I'm quoting, most of the brokers I know and have met over the years are phenomenal, world-class salespeople. But a great many of these security selling savants don't attain the knowledge necessary to actually accomplish anything for their clients. Selling one's expertise is much easier than actually developing an expertise, especially as it pertains to investing. So what they will do is they'll take all your information, they'll plug it into a computer, they'll give you a computer-generated report. It can be as long as 400 pages. I once did that. I once thought when I started Adams Financial Concepts, we were going to need some financial programming. And so we bought the very best we could buy, sent my administrative manager to take a class, spent almost $4,000 just for that one week, plus the programming. And we produced our first report. It was 400 pages long. You've seen some of those reports probably. It was glorious. It had all sorts of pie charts. It had line graphs. It had tables. It had charts. It had everything, and they were in a rainbow of colors. It was beautiful. It was truly beautiful. And they had Monte Carlo simulation. which told you the probability of ever running out of money. And the computer did all that. And not only that, once a quarter or once a year, they would get together with you and update all that information. You know, you've probably gone through that whole process. But of course, what they don't tell you is a plan is for a static world, as if nothing ever changes. They don't tell you that because most of them don't know. It's not we live in a dynamic world where things do change. They don't tell you that stock markets are not symmetrical. That's what Monte Carlo simulation assumes, is that they are symmetrical. That's what it is. And so they don't really work when they tell you. In addition, those plans have nothing in the plan for black swans like the Great Recessions and pandemics and some of the other black swans we will probably face. And maybe all of that is because I'm skeptical of the process, because I'm a mathematician and I realize the fallacy of the statistical methods that they use. But I also began my career way back before financial planning was the sales tool of stockbrokers and financial advisors. When I began in business, if you didn't make money for your clients, they fired you. It was all about that. It was about performance, not about the relationship. It wasn't a time of sell the relationship, not the performance. And if you didn't perform, you were gone. We didn't have quarterly or annual meetings with clients. In fact, I have clients who have been with me for over 3 decades, and I've never met. When we began to charge fees, instead of transaction commissions, meetings suddenly became important. And the reason they became important is because financial advisors had to explain to their clients why they were still paying a fee and losing money. The marketing idea was to sell the relationship and not the performance. So when things went down, they still liked you. There's a cartoon that came out in 1987. I wish I would have cut it out of the paper, saved it, and I didn't do it. And of course, in those days, we didn't have PDFs. So we had copy machines. I should have copied it and put it in the file, but I didn't do that. But that cartoon showed a couple meeting with their financial advisor, stockbroker at that time. And the stockbroker was saying to them, well, you lost $50,000, but I made $50,000 in fees. So I guess we can call that even. You know, financial advisors want you to like them. They want you to like them so much, you don't really care if your account is up only 5% when the market is up 10 or 15 or 20%. Which brings me back to that question I posed at the beginning of this. If you guessed that $100,000 would turn into over $1 million, in fact, $1,083,471, that's what $100,000 would have grown to at a 10% return. If you guessed $1,083,471, if that was the number in your head, you guessed exactly right. And if you happen to get my newsletter that I sent out with the same question, you know that I got it wrong in the newsletter because I picked up the number for 9% instead of 10%. So forgive me for that. I will send out a correction early next week to let everybody know that I made a mistake. But if you guessed 100,000 grew to $1 million, you got it right. And at 5%, 338,000. And you know, if it's at 15%, that 100,000 at the end of 25 years would be worth $3,291,895. Yes, 100,000 growing at 15% a year. After 25 years, will have grown to $3,291,895. That's a big difference from $338,000 at 5%, right? Which takes me back to that Albert Einstein quote, and I paraphrase it as this: if you're not taking advantage of the compounding and making it work for you, then it's going to work against you. That's just where we are. And if you're dragging bottom, it's a time for thought, because financial advisors are taught by their firms to teach you not to look at the accounting performance. Just like them. Just really, really like who you're working with. But you know what? There's going to be more black swans, and there's no guarantee the next black swan won't last for years and years rather than for a few months. For every 100,000, would you rather end up with 338,000 to go through debt, or 1,083,000, or maybe 3 million? You know, you don't have to be Einstein to understand the difference of where you go through a black swan with 300,000 or 1 million or 3 million. And I don't believe that greater returns mean greater risk. I'm going to talk about that when we come back from the commercial break, and we are coming to a commercial break. If you're not receiving my newsletter, you should sign up for the newsletter. This is a lot of what I wrote, but I'll be writing more in the newsletter beyond this. So sign up for that. You can go to Adams Financial Concepts, send me an email, say, I want to be part of your newsletter. And if you're dragging bottom, it's time to think about changing advisors. Anyway, here's the commercial break. I'll be right back after the commercial break.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I finished the last section by saying I don't believe that greater returns involve greater risk. It's all about math. And even if you're not very mathematical, stay with me for this because it's very simple and straightforward. Take 1 plus 5 plus 9. 1 plus 5 is 6, plus 9 is 15, right? So if you divide 15 by 3, you get 5. Now, put it into investment terms. Cash earns 1%. Bonds over the long term earn 5%. Stocks earn 9%. So if you do an asset allocation of cash, bonds, and stock, and you put 1/3 into each one of those, you get 1 plus 5 plus 9 is equal to 15, assuming that stocks are at 9, and sometimes they're higher than 9. But you get 15 divided by 3 is 5% returns. You know, that's not 9%. I talked earlier in the program that the difference between 5% and 10% is the difference over 25 years of 338,000 to 1,080,000, 83,000. It's a big, big difference. And by doing the asset allocation, mathematically, you come back and have a situation which does not work. So I want to come back to what another thing and talk about. There's a famous movie lines from the movie, or one of the famous movie lines comes from the movie Jerry Maguire. You know the line, "Show me the money." It's a famous line. And I think it may apply to some of the stuff going on in the financial world. I want to take it back to Catherine the Great of Russia. I've talked about this before. She ruled Russia in the mid-1700s. And she had been invited to Paris. She'd been invited to Amsterdam. She'd been invited to Venice. She'd seen a lot of other countries and their empires and what they were doing. And because she received an invitation to go there, she invited dignitaries to come to Russia and see Russia. Only things weren't so great in Russia. Things were pretty bad. The economy is pretty bad. So she didn't want to show off her bad economy. She didn't want to show off how poor the peasants were. So she said to Gregory Potemkin, who was a field marshal, and her lover. She said to Potemkin, the dignitaries are coming. I want you to be a fake village and make it look like it's extremely prosperous. Totally illusionary. Nothing real. And that's what he did. And that's what the dignitaries who came to Russia saw. A fantasy village which looked like everything was prosperous. But in fact, it was anything but that in Russia. And so there's a phrase called the Potemkin village. It's a metaphor for things that look elaborate and impressive, but really have no substance. I believe that is where we live in the financial services industry with the big firms. Now, I mentioned a new white paper from Northern Trust. It was a paper called Getting Paid to Lower Your Risk. It's a paper written by Hunstad, who is a PhD, Beckheisner, who's a certified financial advisor, Lerner, who's a certified financial advisor. They're all very smart people, PhDs, certified financial advisors, analysts, not certified financial analysts. They're all really smart people. And what they say is, given slowing global growth and persistently lower interest rates, plus they list a whole lot of other things, people are not meeting their investment goals. And they talk about market asymmetry. And what they mean by that is markets go down faster than they go up. And so what they're proposing is investing in low volatility stocks, those that don't go down as much when the market goes down, and they don't go up as much as the market goes up. And they make some hypothetical models. Now, they say getting paid to lower your risk. Now, when I first saw the title, I thought, they're going to pay me a fee to invest in their portfolios? And of course, I'm not with Northern Trust, but I'm putting myself in the shoes of a client. I'm saying, getting paid? No. The title is absolutely misleading. You don't get paid. You have to pay to lower your risk. But even that is only hypothetical. That's not true either. You don't get paid, and you don't really lower your risk. So they take a hypothetical model, and they look at volatile stocks, those which bounce up and down more than average. And they take a hypothetical example where the volatile stocks go down 23%, and the stocks they would propose for a low volatility portfolio go down only 4%. Sounds great. In dollar terms, the high volatility stocks they don't want you to invest in, if you have $100, they drop down to 77 value. Whereas the low volatility stocks only drop down to 96. And then when the market starts to come back, the low volatility stocks actually do better than the high volatility. When the high volatility stocks get back to 100, the low volatility stocks in their hypothetical imaginary model, those low volatility stocks get up to $102.30. No, I'm sorry, $103.20. I inverted the two. So what they're saying is it's a win for the low volatility stocks. At least hypothetically it's a win. At least in their study, it's a win. Now, it sounds reasonable and logical. If stocks only go down 4% instead of 23%, it sounds like when the market comes back, they should do better, right? They should. Actually, would you put your money there? So the purpose of that paper is to convince their financial advisors at Northern Trust to put their clients into low volatility portfolios. And back to the movie line, show me the money. To Jerry Maguire, show me the money. Show me portfolios. Talk is cheap. That's what this is about. Talk is cheap. Papers are cheap. Hypotheticals are cheap. Show me where it really worked. It's not that difficult. You know, we do a composite for my clients. We do a composite. I have Interactive Brokers as our custodian. We keep all our client accounts there. What happens is we've hired Morningstar. They go in on a daily basis and collect all the changes that are made in each and every client's portfolio. And they keep them separate. They keep each portfolio separate. And at the end of the quarter, they compile all those and they produce a performance report, which has been collected directly from the custodian to Morningstar. And then that's compiled into a composite. It's not that difficult. It's very simple and very straightforward. And it's automatic. It's not a person going in to collect the data. It's all done through a computer. All that Northern Trust would have to do is set that up and say, these are the portfolios that have been designed with low volatility stocks. We'll make a composite of those. We'll hire Morningstar or Advent or one of the other firms to go in and collect the data. They'll collect it. They'll put out a composite, and we can show low volatility stocks outperform high volatility stocks. It's not that difficult. You know what? They didn't do that. They simply put out a paper to convince their financial advisors to put their clients into low volatility portfolios. It's a Potemkin village. It's illusionary. It looks sophisticated. It looks great. But you know what? It doesn't work. I've got a prospect coming from Northern Trust. It was happenstance that I ended up with a paper from Northern Trust. I get a lot of their stuff. It just happened to be happenstance that I got this paper. We have clients coming from Northern Trust. They're in a low volatility portfolio. That low volatility portfolio has not yet recovered to where it was in December of 2019. It's dragging bottom. Whereas my clients, we're seeing new highs, higher than December 19. We saw that in May. We've seen clients go on to new highs in June. Just show me the money. You can do that if it's real. And if it's not real, you're just spending time to make your advisors put into low volatility portfolios so that clients won't come back and sue them because their portfolios are way down. You know, the idea is to sell the relationship and not the performance. And what you get is $338,000 instead of $1 million, or $338,000 instead of $3 million. To me, that's paying a lot to an advisor. It's not a 1% fee. You're giving up hundreds of thousands of dollars because you like that advisor, because you want to like the advisor, and because you don't know what the performance is, because the advisor doesn't know what the performance is. 75% of those advisors believe they're outperforming the Standard & Poor's 500. 75% of the clients believe they're outperforming. Just ain't true. So I did talk to one client who felt that she had achieved the same kind of returns that I had. There's a starting value, there's an ending value, and you can plug it into a formula and see this is what the return has been. 5%, not 15. Anyway, coming to a commercial break, don't go away. We've got more to cover. We'll be right back.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer.
The times, they are a-changing. They are a-changing. And when Bob Dylan sang that song in 1965, he could be singing that song today. The times, they are a-changing, because if you're not a-changing, you could be sinking like a stone. You know, it was a different time. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. There were the Vietnam War protests. It was a time in which the anti-war movement began. And it began small. It began mostly with peace activists and leftist intellectuals on college campuses. And it began small with a few demonstrations, and they began to grow, and they began to grow. And we didn't have social media in those days. We didn't have Facebook, and we didn't have all the networks that are set up with social media. And so they grew small, and from campus to campus to campus. The largest demonstration, I believe, was 15 to 20,000. But even though it began small, localized protest, it became a national prominence. And there was a lot of pushback. There were pushbacks from the police, from security departments, security people on campuses, police, and even they called out the National Guard. They called out the National Guard for a big protest because the protest began to be violent. At Kent State, they burned down the ROTC building. It was a big protest, a significant protest. The National Guard had been called in. And in a period of 13 seconds, the National Guard started to fire. 4 students were killed, 9 were wounded. And suddenly, it hit a moment like we're beginning to see today with Black Lives Matter. It became a nationwide strike on college campuses. But that's not all that was going on. It wasn't just the anti-war movement. In the South had been segregated. You could go into restaurants, and there was a white section and a colored section. There were drinking fountains for whites, drinking fountains for coloreds. It was segregation. There were schools for blacks, there were schools for whites, and it was completely separated. And that began to come apart as well. You had sit-ins. So you had especially young liberal students and young liberals, intellectuals, who went to the South to do sit-ins. They would sit in restaurants where you had a white and a black separation. The whites would sit in the black. They did a sit-in. They did sit-ins in schools. They did sit-ins here and there. And that turned violent as well. There were a number of those civil rights workers who were murdered. And of course, you had the marches. You had the big protest marches, like the Selma March. You know, there was a struggle for equal rights. And you had a lot of inequalities around the difference between what women were paid and men were paid. And you had glass ceilings. You had a white male establishment. And so was born the Equal Rights Amendment movement, Gloria Steinem, and the group of women that started that because of the inequality that existed between men and women. But it wasn't just there. We were getting older in those times. So even though a lot of that was with younger, especially the civil rights, especially with the anti-war, that had begun with younger people, older people were beginning to get older. When my father was approaching retirement in 1978, one of the options at his company was a 5-year annuity, because most people, when they got to be 65 years old, didn't live to 70. People were beginning to get older and live beyond that 5-year time period. They were beginning to live into their 70s and 80s, and they didn't have health care coverage. And so there was a need to make changes for the elderly, for the health care. But it was a highly disruptive and divisive time, and it became so violent. It was evidenced by assassinations. John Kennedy was shot to death in 1963. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. It was a time. It was so disruptive. It was so divisive. It was called the Greening of America, and there would be huge changes that came out of that. Desegregation and laws that passed in Congress for civil rights, the civil rights movement. There was, on the policing side, the Miranda rights grew out of that. Medicare, Medicaid, the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, guaranteeing women the equal rights with men, was begun at that time. There was an inequality of races, of sexes. There was a question about world peace. And all of that is coming at that time. Now, as we look at what's going on in this time, with the Black Lives Matter, with the tremendous weeks of protest we're seeing, but we're seeing other issues as well. Universal health care is a question. That's something looking at the levels of poverty. We're seeing as well income inequality. We're seeing lifestyle changes that are beginning to take place. And, of course, overlying all that is climate change. I see so many parallels between the 50s and 60s and the 2020s. It's almost amazing. The only thing I don't see are the songs that we had in the 60s and 70s. They sing some of the same songs, "We Shall Overcome." They sing some of the same kind of songs of the 60s and 70s, but you don't see many of the songs. Maybe that will come. But we're living in a time when there's going to be three things that we're looking at: technology, demographics, and lifestyle changes, which are going to make huge differences in this country and from what we've seen in the rest of the world, probably the rest of the world as well. And if you're not prepared on an investment basis for that, as Bob Dylan says in The Times They Are Changing, you'll sink like a stone. The wage differences between top executives and corporate and the low-level workers has increased dramatically in the last 30 to 40 years. Since 1980, GDP has grown 79% during 40 years through the end of last year. But for the bottom one half of the bottom workers, who they have only seen a 20% increase in their incomes. The after-tax income for the middle third has seen an increase of only 50%. But the tax for the very wealthy, the after-tax incomes for the very wealthy, has increased 420%. So the bottom, 20%, the middle, 50%, the very top, 420%. GDP has grown 79% over the last 40. Think of the inequality that's grown. And it's been more difficult for the younger people, the millennials. The number of people who are making more than their parents at the same age, for those born in 1940, 92% were making more than their parents at the same age. For those who were born in 1980, only half were making as much or more than their parents were made at the same age. The median net worth for Americans under the age of 35 is 40% less for those who were under 35 in 2004. Those are significant differences inequality. And in education, the difference between college and non-college is very significant. And it's even worse for those who don't graduate from high school. There has been an emphasis on college and trade schools, but student debt is overwhelming for many of those who continue on. Those inequalities, I would guess, are going to be addressed. And for investment, there are going to be differences in investment in companies, in lifestyles, and technology. And there's more to come because we're coming to a commercial break. I want to continue to talk about this because the times, they are changing, and they will continue to change. And it's important to be ahead and not behind, not to be sinking like a stone.
Come gather round, people.
Don't begin swimming, you will sink back like a stone. The times are changing. I addressed the differences in income inequality. Those things are going to be addressed. There's differences in healthcare that are coming. We went through the whole thing with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and we saw some changes in healthcare. And we've seen some of those stripped away over the past administration. The idea was to replace some of the things which were wrong in Obamacare and to replace them with something that's better. Will it happen that way or not? We'll have to see which administration comes. But we know there's a huge need for health care. It's one of the primary concerns of the voters. You know, when you look at where we are, the United States spends twice as much money on a healthcare system per capita as any other country in the world. Twice as much. We spend twice as much for healthcare as any other country. And yet, if you look at the 36 developed countries, we rank 33rd out of 36 developed countries in terms of infant mortality. 33. You'd think for spending twice as much on healthcare as any other country, as any one of those other 36 countries, more than twice. Some of those countries were spending 3 and 4 times as much. We rank 33rd. And in life expectancy, pre-COVID-19, looking at where we stand out of those 36 countries where we're spending more than twice of the second country, the country that spends second per capita only to us, we spend more than twice as any other country, sometimes 3 and 4. Our life expectancy out of 36 countries, we rank 28th. You'd think that we would be number 1 in infant mortality, number 1 in life expectancy. You'd expect we would lose fewer babies at birth than any other country. Yet 32 other countries have a better birthing record than we do in keeping their infants alive. 32 countries better than us. And not only that, 27 countries, in 27 countries, people live longer than they do in the U.S. Now, that's all pre-COVID. Maybe that'll change, maybe not. But 27 countries, we spend twice or 3 times or 4 times as much as anyone else. And part of the issue is that 25 million people are uninsured. 46% of the population is underinsured. So the top portion of the country is getting plenty of insurance or plenty of medical care. The bottom portions of the population are getting very little coverage. They end up with going to the emergency room. They have to be extremely sick to go to the emergency room. And we end up paying more for that than if they'd had that. And the impact is that death rates among African Americans is 2 to 3 times higher than white Americans. It impacts all of us. It's more vulnerable. They pass their infections on to us. Think about what's gone on with COVID. You know, the first line workers are the grocery store clerks, the janitors, the cleaning people, the people that are wiping down and sanitizing where we go, the restaurant workers, the healthcare providers, not just the doctors, not just the nurses, but the clerical and the cleaners, the immigrants who are working in assisted living. They clean the bedpans, they wash and clean soiled sheets. Think, it's the bus drivers, the public transportation people that get you around. It's the people who are sweeping the streets, that are cleaning up after the protest. And when they get sick, they have reduced care. They don't have sick leave. They don't have child care. They don't have insurance. That's the impact. And those things, I believe, are going to be addressed. We're already seeing people evaluate changes in lifestyles, seeing people evaluate how they're spending money. You know, the savings rate has shot way up. We haven't seen the savings rate this high since Reagan times. We haven't seen retail sales down as much as they've been in decades. 40% of consumers have cut back already. And some of those things are going to be long-lasting. 63% of Americans are worried about running out of money. There's going to be increased poverty. You know, the social interactions are in the process of changing as well. Think about it. Walking down the street. There was a time when you're walking on the sidewalk, if you were walking towards somebody and you walked out of the way, walked onto the grass, and then back again, that'd be considered pretty rude. Today, if you don't do that, if you don't maintain 6 feet difference, it's considered rude if you're not doing that. That's a change in lifestyle. We're seeing changes in technology and social interaction. We're seeing more online interaction. We're seeing more people working from home. That's going to have an impact on offices and office buildings. It's going to have an impact on companies and what they do. Business travel is being reduced. I am coming up on July 23rd to do the money show again. I'm going to be doing a virtual money show. It's just for accredited investors, those that have $1 million in assets and $2.1 million in net worth. But it's going to be simply a virtual money show. And there will be exhibitors. Not only will I be doing 2 presentations, but there'll be an exhibitor, there'll be a booth. You can come to my booth and interact with me on my computer. We can talk face-to-face. Well, not really face-to-face, but on a Zoom, straight across. We can communicate. You can look me in the eye, I can look you in the eye. That's a change that's taking place now, and it's going to continue to take. And personal travel. A lot of people are choosing to stay closer to home. I think that's going to be a tendency to continue as well. And in corporations, the emphasis has been on profitability. They're going to be stronger financially. They're going to look at changes in their supply chain, and they're going to look more at regional hubs rather than globalization. all those changes are coming in terms of lifestyle. And there's probably a lot I don't know, probably a whole lot that I don't know. And of course, the big issue still coming is climate change. It's a worldwide problem. And while we withdrew from the climate accord, we still have to take a leading role in the world for climate change. It needs to be bigger. It needs to come. And each one of these things creates investment opportunities. As Dylan said, if you're not swimming, you'll sink like a stone. If you're not swimming in the correct investment world, your investments are going to sink like a stone. It's one of those times when things are really changing. The times they are changing. Be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve. Be in front. Know where to be. And swim. Don't sink like a stone. Have a very good
about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial